I'm a big believer that I think we're on the cusp of a transformational change in everything that
Okay.
we do in our lives. That I think these things are not going to be limited to pathology education, but it's going to transform every facet and component of our lives. And that's scary, right? In that I
Yeah.
think change is always scary. And I think it's important to actually engage with these things and not just be afraid and worried and not wanting to engage because it's going to happen no matter what. There's just too much incentive and driving that these things are going to transform our world and pathology education.
Welcome to the People of Pathology podcast. I'm Dennis Strink. On this podcast, we explore pathology, laboratory medicine, and forensic science. Like most fields, the emergence of AI can have an impact in pathology, increasing efficiency and accuracy. But what about the educational aspect of the field? Can AI be used as a teaching aid as well? My guest today is Dr. Matt Cecchini. He is one of the authors of a paper exploring the role of AI in pathology education. We'll discuss synthetic data, agentic AI, and a lot more. All right, let's look at what the future of pathology education might be with Dr. Matt Cecchini. Tell us about your journey into pathology.
Yeah, I kind of had a bit of a winding route into pathology. I actually thought I wanted to be an organic chemist when I was in undergraduate, and I was supposed to go to Switzerland and be an apprentice organic chemist, and I didn't get my visa, and so I couldn't go to Switzerland, and so my kind of had to do a bit of a 180 in my life, and then found the MD PhD program at that time, and really kind of hit my interest of medicine and research and kind of combined the two together. And then I did my PhD and I really loved that. I really loved exploring science. And then I started med school and I didn't know I wanted to be a pathologist. I thought I wanted to be an oncologist or a surgeon. And interestingly, in med school, the one thing I really enjoyed was free pizza. And we had free pizza lunches every day for the different specialties. And so I went to every single one as a medical student. And then I showed up for the pathology one, mainly because of the pizza. And then I went there and I just was amazed by the specialty. I just fell in love with it at the Y pathology talk. So I guess I kind of went for the pizza and I stayed for the pathology. And ever since that time, I've really just enjoyed pathology. And I think this is a bit of a problem too in our specialty is that especially now in the undergraduate curriculum where we get less and less exposure to students, a lot of students don't see what we call it the hidden gem of medicine, I think is pathology.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we kind of worked on too with one of my colleagues in Arkansas, Matt Quick. We've been trying to help address this at USCAP, but we've done some sessions on how to help medical students find that, right? So they don't have to just happen in there on a free pizza lunch, right? That type of thing. So anyway, so that's my kind of journey into pathology, but I'm very happy that I'm here.
I like that came for the pizza and stayed for the pathology. That's good.
Yeah.
You are right, though. I mean, obviously, I'm not a pathologist, but spoken to a lot of pathologists on this podcast, and that is a problem that medical students don't know about this specialty.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think it's something that we need to kind of keep standing out in front and highlighting our role. And so we've done something at my institution now where every third year medical student actually rotates through the lab. And so they spend a half day, we bring them through the lab, they do a tour, we talk to them about what's a pathologist, what our role, we show them a microscope. And a lot of them, they leave and they said, I had no idea pathology was so cool. And so I think we just need to kind of double down on those things to really help with that. And I've gotten more involved in medical school now with some of the AI stuff that we're doing. And that's been another window to get in front of the medical students and showing them some of the really exciting things you can do with AI in the pathology space. So that's another way to kind of bring people in.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a lot about that as far as the AI in pathology and pathology education in particular. But I think you're onto something there because showing that we've got all this cool technology in pathology and these really neat, I don't want to call them toys, but just really
Yeah.
cool equipment that we get to use. And I think that would be appealing to a lot of students.
Yeah, no, and a lot of them see it. Like I just gave a talk at the AI interest group, and they had lots of people come up with after wanting to do observerships in pathology and see what we do and how we integrate these things in.
Okay, I like that a lot. Now, tell me how did you become interested in pathology education in particular?
Yeah, I've always been interested in education, and it might be because my mom's a teacher, and so even from a young age, she kind of pushed us to kind of explore and this kind of curiosity learning, and so I've always been interested in kind of teaching others all throughout my training. I found that it's really helpful because I think if you can teach someone how to do something, it really helps you understand it as well. Because it means that you've kind of put it in your brain enough that you can then disseminate that knowledge to others. And so it's something that I've always found very useful is to try and teach others things. And it's something I get a lot of reward out of as well. And in teaching others and especially around pathology and technology and the kind of intersection of the two things together.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Now you've used YouTube as an educational tool, and now you're exploring LLMs in education. I'm curious, why do you think you're drawn to using novel teaching methods like these?
Yeah, I don't really like just doing things because that's the way we've done it, right? And I really like to push things to explore, and I think it's really important that we take risks on things, right? Because if you don't take risks on things, you'll never actually get better, right? And so I'm really I have a low bar to try new things, and I just assume they're going to fail, and then I'll figure it out. And so an example, like I started doing the YouTube thing during my fellowship at Mayo Clinic, and it was actually during the pandemic that just hit, and there was kind of not a lot of educational content online, and so I just started like I was forced to sit at home for some of it, so I just started making YouTube videos, and we started doing these online Zoom things, and this was the very early days when no one knew anything, and I was posting public Zoom links on Twitter and just having people join these teaching sessions. And it was really cool. I had like hundreds of people join these talks, which was amazing for me as a trainee at the time. And it was a great opportunity. But, there's good and bads, it fails. And so one of my early talks was Zoom bombed because I was just putting public links on Twitter with no passwords or anything. And so I had someone maliciously join and disrupt the call. And I didn't have an idea how to boot people out of calls. And it was all live. And but you just kind of roll with it and you figure it out and it was all okay. And I edit that part of the video before I post it on YouTube. But I think it's having the courage to just try things, right? And just be okay if they fail. And you just have to know you have a backup plan of what you do if it doesn't work out. So I've tried to do that as much through my career as I can to just try and embrace these new technologies. Because sometimes they work and sometimes they're exponentially better and other times you get into trouble.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, sometimes they work and you do something that's brand new, and yeah, sometimes it doesn't work, but you learn from that, and then you can do it better the
Yeah,
next time.
exactly.
Mhm. Okay, so getting back to LLMs or
Mhm.
large language models, when did you kind of realize the potential of applying LLMs to pathology education?
Yeah, it was kind of early on. I saw a post right after ChatGPT 3.5 got released, and I saw some amazing things that people were doing with it. And so I tried it pretty early on when it was released a few years ago, and I was blown away. But I realized it wasn't perfect, right? Like I could see like it was still making a large number of errors and was still hallucinating a lot, and I realized it probably wasn't ready for, like, clinical prime time use of, like, I'm gonna use this to help augment my reports and things like that. And then I realized that the education space actually might be a really useful application for this because educational tools don't need to be perfect, right? They're tools, right? They're practice devices, and there's really a lot of paucity of them. There's not a lot of resources in this area, right? And I was thinking it could be a way of helping students learn, but also a way to help make the tools better as well. And so that's some of the stuff my lab does is try and do this human in the loop, augmented type of stuff. And so it kind of aligned with that. And so I just kind of jumped on it early because I saw the benefit and I saw education as a really important initial use case because it kind of created a safe place to try these things out where the stakes were not as high as if you were trying to implement these things into a clinical workflow.
Oh, okay, I get it. It's sort of a practice run using it in
Yeah.
education, right? Okay, the stakes are lower. That makes a lot of sense. And I wonder about these kind of things because when new technologies come out like this, and it seems like especially Chat GPT, it's like it didn't seem like it had very much of a relation to pathology or pathology education, and yet, like you're saying, it does. It was just a matter of trying it out and see if it applies to that area.
Yeah,
Um,
like, it has a lot it's a lot better than you think it was, and that was what kind of amazed me in the initial thing because I thought, "Okay,
mhm.
fine, this can write weird songs or poetry, but, like, it can't know pathology, right?" And the biggest, like, magical moment I saw of it was when it first could take images, I took an image of a normal looking lung, just a histology image, and I uploaded it, and I just said, "What is this?" I didn't tell it I was a pathologist. I didn't tell it was histology image. It was just I just uploaded a picture of lung histology. And I really thought it was going to come back and say, this is just a bunch of weird purple squiggly lines, right? Because how would it know pathology? And it told me that this is an H&E image. It told me it's lung tissue, and it told me it's normal. And this kind of blew me away, right? Of that there was something special here with these tools, that they're different than traditional AI tools, and that they have this general purpose ability of them, right? And that it because they've been trained on so much data that they actually have more of this general knowledge and background than other more specific tools where you have to train them very specific for each task. And it was really amazing that we could take something that was as general purpose tools and it had some ability to do pathology. And that was really exciting to me and really kind of had me dive much deeper into it and kind of more using these things.
Do you have any sort of background in like computer programming or something like that?
No, 0. I've never learned to code, and I don't think I need to. Like, I actually write a bunch of code now, but I just have large language models do it for me.
Hmm.
And so, like, I don't think software engineering's dead, but because I think there'll still be jobs in architecturing these things. But like, the need to everyone needs to learn code to write little scripts for stuff, right? I think that that is less needed these days. And so I get by with just telling the large language model, like, I need to do code to do this, right? Like recently
Yeah.
we had reviewer comments on a paper we had to do, and we had to do some statistical analysis in R. And I didn't know how to do that. So I just took the reviewer comments and put that into ChatGPT and said, how do I how do I address this? And I gave it my paper. And then it told me how to write the code in R and put it in. So I just put that code into R and it told me how to format the data. I formatted the data like that. And then it made the graph in R that the reviewer wanted. And then we put it into the paper and got the paper accepted. And so I think these tools can enable a lot of people who don't really have a background in the area. So like my PhD was in biochemistry, and then when I started my lab, it was in the middle of the pandemic and I couldn't really my lab was closed. And so
Hmm.
kind of had to pivot a bit again. And then that's where I found digital pathology and AI. And I kind of just went all in on it. And so
Hmm.
I collaborate a lot with people who have more of a computer science background to do kind of higher end things. But what I like about the space is that even with my background, I can do a lot of interesting and cool things on my own. And then it also allows me to kind of collaborate with others that are kind of taking a deeper dive into the more technical aspects of the field.
Okay, I like that. I like that sort of collaborative aspect to it. I want to talk about a paper that you co-authored. So this is called "Harnessing the Power of Generative Artificial Intelligence in Pathology Education: Opportunities, Challenges, and Future Directions." Where did the idea for this paper come?
Yeah, so one of my mentors, Dr. Raj Singh, and I chat a lot about large language models and how to integrate them. And through our conversations, we realized that a lot of people are doing some really cool stuff, and that there's, especially in the education space, and there's really not been a paper yet that's kind of outlined that. And we're all kind of working in isolation, and there really was really no forum that we could kind of combine and tell people about some of the interesting things. Everyone was kind of just reinventing the wheel in some senses. And so Raj was great. He helped put together this real all-star team of people that I was really privileged to work with from across North America. It was really amazing to sit down and hear all the amazing things and use cases that everyone was doing. I think I learned like 100 new things that I could do with these tools just by kind of hearing what everyone was doing. And so that's kind of where the paper came from. And then we tried to make the paper very practical and useful for people, really around things that you can do with these tools today, right? So not things that will be happening in 6 months, or you need some supercomputer or some, like crazy system to do. These are things that you can do yourself today on your
Mhm.
computer and help understand pathologists of how best to use it and how to optimize that.
That's a really good point, actually, because these tools are available for everyone. I mean, anybody can download ChatGPT, for instance. And yeah, you don't need like you said, a supercomputer to use these. It's very accessible.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's really helpful. And I use it all the time. Like, in fact, I was actually preparing for the interview this morning. On my drive in, I actually put some of the questions into the advanced voice mode of ChatGPT while I was driving, and I did a mock podcast with ChatGPT this morning. And then after I answered
Oh,
each
wow.
question, it actually gave me feedback on my answers and told me how to improve them and how to optimize it. And yeah, so it's, hopefully that's maybe improving our podcast here, but you can use these things for a lot of really interesting things.
I have to admit, sometimes I do use Chat GPT to come up with questions.
Yeah, you gotta try the voice mode though. I find that that's really helpful. I've used that for a bunch of things. I've used
Okay.
it to help practice for interview prep, and so like give it the people who are interviewing you, and then have it ask you questions as if they're those people, and you can give it your CV, and it'll ask you questions about your CV, and then it gives you feedback after each of the time you do it, and it's all by voice. It's not by typing, right?
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
Okay. Let's get into some of the aspects
sure.
of this paper because, like you said, there were some very interesting use cases there. Now, the first one, the paper highlights using LLMs for education that and can offer personalized instruction. So it's like it's tailored to the learner's understanding level or education level. And I'm very interested in this. Can we talk about this aspect?
Yeah, this is something I'm really, really interested in, and I think it's one of the most effective uses I think right now of these large language models, and something I actually use myself. And so, the one thing is a lot of people will put up when they're talking about AI. Like I do lots of talks on AI, and a lot of people when they're doing talks on it, they show this transformer architecture image, and I have to say I've never really understood it. I couldn't really understand it, and I read the paper that it was about, but it was just too technical for me to understand, and kind of went over my head. And so what I did is I took the paper about this transformer architecture and I took the image and I asked a large language model to explain it to me as if I was a pathologist. And it explained to me this complex transformer architecture in a way that a pathologist would understand. It described breaking up things as tokens, as like you have a specimen and you're cutting up individual sections, and you have these sections, and you know where these sections come from, and you analyze each independently, but then you can kind of connect them all together. And it kind of used that analogy to walk me through this whole transformer architecture. And I can say now that I have a much deeper understanding of it because it explained it to me in a way I could understand. And it's something that I've used in my own teaching as well. So I'm a pulmonary pathologist. And one concept that trainees often have a hard time understanding is lipidic lung cancer, which is a non invasive form of lung cancer. And so I've used ChatGPT to explain that to trainees. And it describes it as imagine a vine growing through a garden that's kind of just growing along the surface, but not invading deeply down. And I thought that that was a really useful way of explaining it. And it's not something that I've heard in the past. And interestingly, when I was developing this, I actually pushed ChatGPT a little bit further and asked it to describe it to someone who was in kindergarten, lipidic lung cancer, which honestly seems a bit like an impossible task. And it described it as imagine you have a drawing and then you put a sticker on top of it. The sticker doesn't mess up what's underneath it, but you should probably check it out to make sure. And and that to me was like that actually someone in kindergarten could probably understand that concept of lipidic non-invasive lung cancer. And I think this is one of the magical things about it is that, you could put me in a room for 2 years and I don't know if I would come up with something that good of how to explain lipidic lung cancer to someone in kindergarten because it's just so out of my wheelhouse, right?
Right.
And so these kind of remixing and reimagining of things, I think, is really powerful. And I think there's a huge opportunity here for allowing patients to better understand their pathology, right? So we produce these extremely technical documents that are not written for patients at all,
Right.
and they're confusing. And I think the large language models, I think one future opportunity for them is allowing us to better understand them, right? And you can imagine too that it would because these things are really good at language. So you could be a way of putting content into different languages for people as well to kind of meet people where they are and optimize content for where they're at.
Okay. Yeah. I like this aspect of translating the pathology report for patients. That's very useful. And do you imagine there being sometime in the future, like instead of like you said, pathology reports or technical documents, do you imagine them being sort of almost two versions of them, one for the clinicians and then a separate report that's translated kind of for the patient?
I
Something like
think
that?
I think the future is I think my guess is a lot of these EMR systems and LIS systems are going to start integrating large language models more and more. Because the one barrier is that you can't put actual patient data into any of these services right now, right? Because these things are not compliant with privacy systems. So that's an important
Yeah.
thing for everyone to remember, is that you cannot in any way put any patient information into these systems in their current state. But I think as these things evolve, we'll start to see these things integrated within these systems in a compliant way, right? So you open
Hmm.
up your EMR, and then there's a large language model running in the background, and then I think what that will then allow it to do is to remix or reoptimize information in any way that people want. So just like patients have access to through patient portals, right? You can imagine that there'll probably be an LLM based in there as well, where they
Hmm.
might be able to ask questions about their lab data, their lab tests, or what does that mean, and put in the context, right? And just the same thing as they'll be able to ask questions about their consult notes is, what does it mean when the doctor said that, that I have a lung mass, and could this be cancer? And I think it will help patients better understand their information. And so I see that's probably the route it will go, just because of the privacy and compliance piece of here as well. But the other piece of it is I bet patients will start doing this themselves, right? That a lot of these adoption of these AI tools has really been from the ground up, not from the kind of top down. So you can imagine patients getting a copy of their pathology report and just themselves uploading it to one of these services, right? And having
Hmm.
to explain it. And if it's like, if I'm taking my own pathology report and choosing to not and to upload it wherever, then that's on me, right? And so then there's not the privacy thing there because it's your own information. So I think it's a bit of both, but I think it's important that we do design tools that help patients do this, and we integrate them into our systems in a safe and compliant and way that ensures patient privacy.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. This is the People of Pathology podcast with our guest, Dr. Matt Cecchini. We'll be right back. If you think it would be nice to have a helpful reference about digital pathology, I have some great news for you. Dr. Alexander Zhurov has written a book called Digital Pathology 101. All you need to know to start and continue your digital pathology journey. This book will help you whether you're a complete novice or a digital pathology trailblazer. You can get a copy of it by following the link in the show notes. LabVine is an interactive online learning platform where laboratory professionals learn, develop, and discover by sharing knowledge and building on each other's experience. The platform provides global access to internationally accredited laboratory specific courses and other resources developed by lab specialists like us for the laboratory industry. LabVine is free to sign up, and you can use the link in the show notes to get started. Now for the rest of my conversation with Dr. Matt Cecchini on the People of Pathology podcast. Now, getting back to the education aspect of this, I was thinking like for say pathology residents or even medical students, it's a different level of understanding for say a first year pathology resident versus a fourth year, and you can use this kind of technology, these models, to modify the complexity of the information based on their education level. Right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, no, 100%. You can have it optimized at different levels, and give easy or harder questions based on their level of training.
Okay. Okay. That sounds very useful. Something else in the paper that I want to get into. So this is synthetic data.
Mhm.
And so first of all, what is this? What does this mean?
Yeah, so this is something that's becoming a much bigger topic these days, and part of it is driven that the foundation models like ChatGPT, they've actually run out of data, right? So the newest generation of models that people are training on, they've actually run out of data. They've actually already have all of data that humankind has ever created or published. So in GPT 4.0, everything that humans have ever written that these models can scrape is in it already. And so that creates a problem, right? They've hit this wall of data, right? And so how do you get more data? Is they're moving towards synthetic data. And so they're generating the synthetic data by having large language models create different data that it can then learn off of, because that's how you get new content in a kind of more exponential way. And so you can use that as well. And so the the one barrier to doing research often is, in working with patient data or things like that, because there's a lot of risks associated with it. And so if you're working with patient information and data, you have to be very careful that you are compliant with all the privacy legislation. People are working with it on site, and there's all these rules and regulations that are critically important, because this information is, very, very important that we manage it and we're good stewards of this data. And so the one way that you can reduce and mitigate a lot of these risks is actually synthetic data. And so it's something that we've been doing a lot lately is using large language models to create synthetic medical history data, pathology data, radiology data. And then you're free to use that however you see fit because it's not real patient data. It doesn't
Hmm.
have any risks of some patient information may get disclosed or leaked because it's just random data that it's made up, but it's good data. And then you can then experiment on that. And there's a lot of power in that. And one of the powers is that you can get a lot of people working on it, right? And so if I was doing a study in my institution, everyone would have to be working on site. They'd have to have privileges and credentials. They'd all have to be approved by the REB. Whereas these studies with synthetic data, I can open it up to anywhere in the world, and I can have participants and students working on this, and you can really empower a lot of people to enter in these research things that are much more inclusive, and it's a way of exploring in a safe way, but you can make gains and advances much more exponentially.
That sounds very useful. And I think this was mentioned in the paper. You can use synthetic data. So like you're saying, you're kind of basically inventing a patient.
Yeah.
It's accurate data, but it's not a real person. And you can make a patient with some kind of rare condition that people might not otherwise have access to. And then you
Yeah,
can
exactly. Yeah,
use.
and the hopefully, I think there will soon be a day where we can actually make pathology slides that go along with it as well, right? So you can imagine that, like, so trainees might not be able to see a rare diagnosis or rare feature
Hmm.
in a pathology slide, and the tools aren't there yet. But you can imagine, just like there's all these generative images and video, right? I think we'll eventually get there, probably in the next 5 or 10 years, where we can actually make generative histopathology slides. And I could say, make me, like a super rare case, a pleural pulmonary blastoma case that has this feature in it, right? And then it would make a report and a slide of that, and then the trainees could basically learn off that instead of having to find these really rare things in these archives.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. So I'm a pathologist assistant. What about making like a synthetic growth specimen?
Yeah, well, the same thing, right? Is you can have something that's we have a pathologist assistant training program here, and so I do some
Uh-huh.
research projects with them, and we've explored the using this to with images as well. So like taking gross images and making training programs around that, around having students write descriptions, having the model write descriptions, and having the models kind of help the students refine their descriptions of various processes, and kind of as these kind of guided tutor things as well. But you can imagine the future that it might be able to make different permutations of specimens as well for training of students, right? Especially some really rare diagnoses. Right? So some of the things right now is the commercial tools will actually block making gross image specimens. Because that violates, like, pictures of organs actually violates the terms of use for a lot of these, and so that type of use is actually blocked by these. So my guess is you'd actually need some specialized tools to build these because it's just the nature of them. It's a very kind of niche specialty task.
Okay. So let's talk about agentic AI. So agentic AI can work with a degree of autonomy,
Yeah.
and it's starting to play a role in some settings here. So can you talk about how this type of AI could be helpful to pathologists?
Yeah, it's something I'm really excited about. And I think this is where AI is moving towards. So I think we're moving away from just the simple chatbot interfaces into more of these agents, which is kind of the concept behind this agentic AI. And that these tools can kind of work with you on a longer time frame and horizon and make some decision aspects themselves. And they function more like a team member or a colleague on a task, right? So if we're going to think about this through the educational lens, like, you can imagine having an agentic AI tutor. So that works with you as you're reviewing cases, and it would be with you throughout your training program, right? So imagine you start your residency and you have this agentic AI tutor, and it knows where you are. It knows that you really don't have a background in histology. And then it's working with you as you're looking at slides. And so it's maybe it's running as you're looking at the digital pathology slides, and you really have no idea what you're doing, how to approach this, and it's guiding you towards that and helping you make those insights. But then it grows with you as you develop, right? And so when you're in your final years of training, it's not just giving you all the answers, but it's pushing you to make some of those additional connections and concepts to really to refine your knowledge to get there as a pathologist. And so I think these tools can really, like, this is just one example, but I think we can really start thinking about how we can have these agentic type tools really improving our efficiency in as pathologists and educators. And I think an important thing is that these things are not replacements of a human. And so one thing that I believe very firmly in is that AI plus human is always better, and it's AI augmented workflows. And so my vision for these things is that it doesn't replace a sign out experience where a trainee is sitting at beside me at the microscope and we're talking about a case, but it augments it because maybe because I can't spend 8 hours a day sitting beside them going through every detail of the case, but these AI tutors very easily could. Catching small little errors or concepts that they might be making mistakes on and kind of help refining that over time, right? And so it gives this on-demand education piece that they wouldn't be able to get if they're relying on just my time. Right? And so,
Okay.
but then they come to me at sign out, and then they have some real like high-level questions of how do you approach this one very complex scenario in pulmonary pathology, and we have a really engaging discussion around that, and we use our time together about these higher level type of concepts and ideas than around, is that tumor in this lymph node, right? We can kind of move past these things and kind of focus our time on the higher level things. So I think I'm just really thinking about how these things can augment our workflows and really allow us to do things that wouldn't have been possible in the past.
So what you're talking about, I feel like this could result in kind of over dependence on the AI tool.
Yeah.
And that could then lead to underdevelopment of critical thinking, which you also mentioned this in the paper as well. How do we mitigate this risk?
Yeah, it's a really important thing. And I was reading a study, I think it was in high school students, but they had two groups of students. One group of students could use AI for their homework, the other group couldn't. And the students who had AI help for their homework did worse on the exam. And I think that's a really important thing to remember is that learning is about putting in the hard work. And if you have something that limits your need to do the hard work, well, then you're not really going to learn, right? Learning is hard and you have to put in the effort. And the way I conceptualize it is kind of like going to the gym. If you don't put in the effort in the gym, you're not going to get the gains, right? And so but technology can help. So some of the fancy gym machines might allow you to more optimize your workout than if you were just running outside, right? And that's kind of how I conceptualize these large language models. Is they don't replace the need to put in hard work to learn concepts, but they might allow you to learn in a different way that augments it and helps it and allows you to learn in a more efficient way. And I think that that's how we should think about these things, not as tools to just move quicker during our current tasks, but can you do different tasks, right? Could they give them an AI augmented homework session where the students, use AI and it kind of guides them and forces them to learn in a much more nuanced way. And so I think
Mm,
we need to think about the same thing in pathology, right? So we don't want just the tool saying, here's all the prostate cancer, this is the Gleason 5, this is the Gleason 4, right? That's that's not helpful to anyone, right? That's just gonna make, people who are over reliant on it. But you can use it in a different way, right? So maybe these tools are giving short little areas of tumor to trainees without like saying, "What do you think the Gleason grade is here?" And then giving immediate feedback of what the Gleason grade is, right? And then it's this more dynamic learning tool where you have this kind of rapid feedback learning loop where people can learn in a more effective way or things like that. But I think we just need to design these tools in a way that augments learning, not just allows people to shortcut learning because there's there's no there's no shortcut. You can't just skip out on the hard work of learning. You need to do that hard work. Maybe they can make it a bit easier, but you still need to do the work.
okay. I think you mentioned a couple of these already, but there are ethical concerns to be aware of when we're using LLMs in this manner. And you mentioned already you can't put patient data in there, even about the gross images. You can't do that. How do we deal with these ethical concerns? And I'm curious also, like, is there, because these models are trained on data, is there a possibility for data bias?
Yeah, so there's a number of concerns here. So in addition to not being able to put patient information up there, you shouldn't put trainee data up there either. So you shouldn't use this to mark someone's performance unless it's in a controlled way and has consent and everything. So
Uh-huh.
And also the big things that you should not put into a standard LLM, it would be training or performance data of any kind of trainees. There's definitely a bias problem in that these things were trained on the stuff that is out there, right? And so it's biased by that. And then the other problem is hallucinations. And this is a big problem, especially in the educational landscape. There was a oral presentation at USCAP last year where someone showed that trainees are much less likely to identify hallucinations in the large language models than someone who is trained in the field. And so that's a problem, right? Because they might be
Yeah.
actually learning the wrong things. And so you can help mitigate these risks of both bias and hallucinations with the same approach. And that's by giving it additional information. And so a lot of the educational tools, what I do is I actually give it information that I want it to base the educational content on. And so that might be my lecture notes or PowerPoint presentations on a topic, or even just other content that I've generated, or even like YouTube videos as well. I've uploaded those into it and had it based educational questions and content on that. And that helps in twofold. One is that I can control the bias, right? Because it's not just pulling whatever was in its training data, but I can have it kind of limit its questions or its content around the stuff that I can control. And the other thing is then I have a bit of fact checking it. So these things are not perfect, but in my experience, that tends to reduce the rate of kind of inappropriate bias and hallucination in these things. And so that's the approach that I've taken. The other thing you can do is there's some prompt tuning here as well, depending on how you ask the prompt of it. So you can kind of skew the bias one way or the other. But these are definitely things that we're going to be grappling with. But I
Mhm.
think there's ways to mitigate some of these risks.
Okay. What about like adding the synthetic data into the sort of data set? Would that affect the bias in any way?
Yeah, and well, that's a bit of an open question, right? And this is a
Mhm.
bigger question, especially with these next generation of models. Since we've run out of actual real data,
Yeah.
does actually adding in a whole bunch of synthetic data actually help? And I think that's a really an open question. I think there's some rumors that the performance of the next generation models might not be that much better, but I think we just need to see. And so I think a lot of these are unknown, right? We don't really know how these adding massive amounts of, if you overwhelm the systems with synthetic data, because you can essentially make limitless amounts of it, does that drive it in a way that doesn't actually align with actually what we're trying to optimize for? But there's other strategies you can do. There's things like these digital twin things where you can create synthetic versions of individual patients that some individuals are in research labs are working on. So it's a way of making sure that the synthetic data is actually grounded in fact and in real people and of ways to kind of explore things.
Okay, that's interesting. Hmm. So it's kind of we're gonna have to see where it goes as we have more experience with.
There's a lot of unknowns. Is it just moving very fast, right?
Mhm.
Like these, all this is like less than 3 years old, right?
Right.
These real advanced tools, right? And seems like each week and each day there's a different thing that you can do.
Yeah, for sure. We are definitely at the beginning of using LLMs, especially in pathology education and other AI tools as well.
Yeah, like one of the actually I was teaching a class, and one of the things I did to help students remember things is I actually turned one of the things they had to memorize into a song. So I yeah, so I took the content, put it into ChatGPT, had it make lyrics, and
Okay.
then I used another AI program called Suno, which will turn anything into a song.
Uh-huh.
And so I made a barbershop quartet song about a specific fusion that they needed to remember, and then they all remembered it because it's this idea that it gets stuck in your head, right? I made this like AI optimized brain worm that got stuck in their head. And I actually saw a student a few months later and they were complaining that they still couldn't get that song stuck out of their head. And they'll never be able to forget this fusion now in myxoid liposarcoma. And so I think you can do a lot of really interesting and out of the box things of helping people learn in different ways and things like that, like turning it into songs, right?
Sure, sure. I love that. That's a great idea. Do you think there will come a time where using LLMs for education will become kind of the norm? And like this is the usual way, and the way we do it now is kind of the old way or whatever, something like that?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that I think we're on the cusp of a transformational change in everything that
Okay.
we do in our lives. That I think these things are not going to be limited to pathology education, but it's going to transform every facet and component of our lives. And that's scary, right? In that I
Yeah.
think change is always scary. And I think it's important to actually engage with these things and not just be afraid and worried and not wanting to engage because it's going to happen no matter what. There's just too much incentive and driving that these things are going to transform our world and pathology education. And
Hmm.
so, what I think is actually critical is that we as pathologists and we as educators actually engage with this from day one so that we can build it in a way that is best for everyone, best for our students, best for the educators, best for our field. And because if we don't, we kind of just stick our heads in the sand a bit and just assume it's going to go away or be a fad. I think then it gets designed in a way that maybe is not optimal for us, right? And so I try and really encourage people to just try these things and engage with them. And they don't work perfectly. I've kind of adopted this AI first strategy in my life where anything that anyone gives me, the first thing I do is try and solve it with an AI tool, and honestly, most of the time, it doesn't really work. But it gets me at least part of the way there. And then I learn something about how the AI tool works and how to optimize my use of it. And then next time I'll know how to use it a little bit better, right? And so this has been really transformative in my life and has really helped with a lot of efficiency gains, right? Someone asked me to make multiple choice questions. I put my lecture notes into a custom GPT I built that then gives me specific multiple choice questions in my format, and I can make limitless multiple choice questions for anything that they want.
Hmm.
This kind of AI first mentality has been really helpful for me, and I think this type of engagement with it, I think, is really important because then we can design these systems in a way that really help benefit everyone. Hopefully, does that answer the question? Or sorry, was
Yeah,
I
yeah, totally, totally. I was thinking like ways that you can kind of, these technologies are coming or they're actually kind of already here. And how do you prepare to do that? And I think you're saying just try it, just get familiar with how it works.
yeah.
Right.
It can do most things, right? Like you can even like when I do YouTube videos on my YouTube channel and I need to write a description for it, I just
Hmm.
put the video into Gemini and say, write me a description for the video. And then it writes me like a description of it that's not perfect, but it's like 90% of the way there. And I, make a few changes and it's done. Right. And so,
Sure.
you just have to remember that you're responsible for everything the large language models do. Right. Just like they're not a shortcut for your homework. But you still need to do the work, right? You still need to be responsible for everything that they're doing. You need to check all their output because they do make errors. They're not perfect, but
Hmm.
they get you 90% of the way there most times.
Yeah. Yeah. I like this. I like this. Okay. Dr. Cecchini, this has been fascinating. I love talking about this kind of stuff, and I appreciate your time. So, and I'll include a link to the paper in the show notes for this episode so people can read it also. So, Dr. Matt Cecchini, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
If you're looking for another episode of the People of Pathology podcast to check out after this one, here's a clip from my interview with Dr. Simone Arvise-Anholt as we talk about her work in experimenting with using large language models in clinical practice.
So large language models, they are a type of artificial intelligence that can recognize and generate text, among other things. They're trained on huge sets of data, which is why they're called large language models. And they're built on a type of neural network called a transformer model. So that's the T in GPT. Basically, what large language models do is that given an input of text, large language models, they can extract meanings from the text, they can understand the relationships between words that are in text, and then they use this information to generate an output by predicting words that are most likely to come given the input. So on ChatGPT, for example, you input text, and then through complex mathematics, basically the output is predictions of the words that are most likely to come next given the input text that was given to the model.
You can hear the rest of my conversation with Dr. Simone Arvise-Anholt and Dr. Daniel Kazi in episode 184. All right, great big thanks to Dr. Matt Cecchini. The integration of large language models, or LLMs, into pathology education presents a transformative opportunity to enhance the learning experience of medical students and pathology residents by providing personalized instruction tailored to each learner's level of understanding. This approach addresses the diverse educational needs of trainees, facilitating a more effective and engaging learning process. One of the key advantages of LLMs is their ability to adapt content based on the learner's current knowledge and skill level. For instance, a first-year pathology resident may require foundational explanations, while a fourth-year resident might benefit from more complex examples. LLMs can adjust the complexity of the information presented, ensuring that each learner receives instruction appropriate for their stage of training. Dr. Cecchini emphasized the importance of designing educational tools that augment learning rather than simply providing shortcuts. By using LLMs to pose questions and challenge students to think critically about their answers, educators can foster a deeper level of engagement and understanding. This approach encourages active learning rather than just passive. So students are not just passive recipients of information, but are actively involved in the learning process. Another exciting application of LLMs in pathology education is the use of synthetic data. As Dr. Cecchini explained, synthetic data refers to artificially generated information that mimics real patient data without compromising privacy or confidentiality. The use of synthetic data is becoming increasingly relevant due to the limitations of existing data sets. With the vast amount of data already utilized in training models like ChatGPT, researchers are turning to synthetic data to create new, diverse scenarios that can be used for educational purposes. The use of synthetic data can democratize access to educational resources. Unlike traditional studies that may require on-site participation and specific credentials, synthetic data allows researchers and trainees from around the world to collaborate and learn from the same set of generated cases. This inclusivity can lead to a broader understanding of pathology across different educational institutions. Since synthetic data sets are not real patients, these cases can be freely shared without ethical or privacy concerns. This can be especially helpful in low-resource settings where there may not be access to a wide variety of study materials. As technology advances, the potential for generating synthetic pathology slides alongside patient histories could revolutionize pathology education. In the next 5 to 10 years, we may see the ability to create highly specific and detailed synthetic cases, including histopathology slides for rare diagnoses. Another exciting development in the realm of LLMs is the concept of Agentic AI, which can function with a degree of autonomy and act as a learning companion for students. Imagine an AI tutor that evolves alongside trainees, providing guidance and support throughout their education. This tutor could assist students in reviewing cases, offering feedback, and helping them make connections between concepts. The integration of Agentic AI into pathology education could enhance the learning experience by allowing for continuous, on-demand support. This would enable educators to focus on higher-level discussions and complex cases during in-person interactions, while the AI handles foundational knowledge and routine questions. While the potential of Agentic AI tools is significant, it is crucial to emphasize the importance of human oversight in the educational process. As Dr. Cecchini points out, the integration of AI should not replace the invaluable role of human educators. Instead, it should augment the learning experience. The risk of over-reliance on AI tools is a valid concern. If students become too dependent on AI for answers, they may neglect the hard work necessary for true learning and critical thinking development. Dr. Cecchini likens it to going to the gym. Without putting in the effort, one cannot achieve meaningful gains. Therefore, it is essential to design AI tools that encourage active engagement and critical analysis rather than simply providing shortcuts to answers. The potential benefits of LLMs in pathology education are substantial, but Dr. Cecchini emphasized the importance of addressing ethical concerns. Issues such as data privacy, bias in training data, and the risk of over-reliance on AI tools must be carefully managed. He notes that students must still engage in the hard work of learning, as relying solely on AI could hinder the development of critical thinking skills. The future of pathology education will likely involve a balanced approach, where agentic AI tools complement the expertise of educators. By leveraging AI for routine tasks and immediate feedback, educators can focus their time on more complex discussions and higher-level concepts. This can lead to a more efficient and effective learning environment where students are empowered to take charge of their education while still benefiting from the guidance of experienced professionals. As always, I'll have links in the show notes to everything that we talked about today, including a link to the paper that we discussed. Don't forget, you can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at People of Path, or just connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you for continuing to share the show with others. Together, let's inspire the next generation of pathologists and laboratory professionals. This show is a member of Health Podcast Network. Thanks for listening. I'm Dennis Strank, and I'll talk to you next time on the People of Pathology podcast.